And welcome back. And as was mentioned earlier in the show, our second conversation for today is once again looking at the University of West Indies Belize Country Conference 2016. Of course, it's themed Leadership for Sustainability. And this time we have a panelist and keynote speaker as well as representative of UE Open Campus here in Belize. We have with us Dr. David Gibson, who is the Associate Director at the University of Texas at Austin. We have Jane Bennett, Head of UE Open Campus Belize, and we have Professor Dale Weber, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Graduate Studies at UE Mona. Good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for having us.
Well, today is officially the Kickstart Day, and we are glad that you decided to start your day early with us. So first of all, welcome and thank you for being here. And I want to start off, Jane, just with a bit of the synopsis, once again, of the conference, right?
Okay. So good morning again, Marlene and Jamie Lee. Happy to be on the show with you this morning. I think I saw you last night. Not sure, but she was at UE.
Yes.
Singing her heart out for the graduates.
Thank my alma mater.
So we're back again. Thank you, Channel 5, to promote our two-day conference. Starts this morning at UE at 9 o'clock. And again, as Marlene said, the overarching theme is Leadership for Sustainability. It is a very trendy topic these days because, as we know, we're in a global climate, if you will, where people are talking about footprints and emissions and going green and all this kind of thing. And we know that it's our leadership, and I want to stress that leadership is not always at the top of the country and the organization. Leadership exists really where you are. And the word sustainability suggests long-term, as Marlene said before, looking to the future. What is it that I do today that will impact tomorrow? And so that's the whole concept of speaking to people who have worked, for example, in the area of climate change, as the people on my right and left have done, and they will no doubt speak to. But there are different aspects of our life, of our world, that needs to be sustained, our natural resources, or seas, or forests, and so on. So we're trying to bring it all together at this conference.
Yes.
But the conference is one thing. What happens after the conference is where we want to go as well.
Well, Professor Weber, as the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the entire UWI family, why was it important for you to come to Belize this year and participate in this Leadership for Sustainability conference?
Well, good morning to you and to your listeners and your viewers. Well, let me start by saying the University of West Indies is committed to the entire region. We're one of only 2 regional universities globally, which gives us a responsibility, the other being University of South Pacific. So we have 17 countries that contribute to this beautiful institution. We therefore have a responsibility to respond to the needs of these 17 countries. There are many things that we have in common. For instance, the Caribbean Sea washes the shore of all these countries. Managing that Caribbean Sea for its best resource and looking at it as we go through climate change, sea level rise, is something that the university has as one of its 15 research pillars. There are many other things that Belize has real strong footprints in. Biodiversity, agriculture, food security. So there are a number of areas that I find very important within this country, and it's not just a one day. Here, I'm going to do the keynote today. And what I want to do is to set the cat among the pigeons. I want to say as much as I can using the data that we have done throughout the university. So there's been research going on at St. Augustine campus about Belize. There's research going on at the Mona campus about Belize. We want to ensure that you know what has been done, share that information so you have benchmarks. So as you set your goals where you want to be in the next 5 years, you can start to plan sustainable development, because development is necessary. You can't hold back development. It's how you do that development. And to talk about how the leaders will do it and how they can engage the information as well as the opportunity. And we see the university as a mechanism that will tie that together. Partnerships is what we're looking for. And Belize has been a wonderful partner to the university.
In your research background, what is the level of investigation that has been done in terms of policy decisions, especially when we're talking about leadership for sustainability? For a long time, we talk about the conservation versus development issue. And in some cases, we see where there is a very short-sighted type of planning that takes place, and even if you perhaps make a decision that is more within a long-term range, it is seen as out of place or out of proportion at the time. Tell me has there been any research in the Caribbean on this particular issue?
Yes, there is. The university has a number of research centers which focus on research, no teaching. Their job is to get the research done, produce the information. We recently pooled together a lot of our research to determine what's the impact of the research in terms of policy.
Okay.
We have found that the research from the University of West Indies is pivotal to the policies throughout the entire Caribbean. Biggest problem is the time frame. For instance, the climate change policy for this region, the view that went to Paris was the research of the UWI that created it. That is the shortest time frame we've seen research hit policy, which is 3 years. Yeah. There have been some long-term ones. For instance, the research that changed our Cape history from European history to Caribbean history, that took almost 11 years. So the time frame from which the research becomes active to the point at which it influences policy, that's been way too long, and we need to shorten that.
Yeah.
Put that now in the context of the decision makers.
Yes.
It is our view at the university that we either need to change the mindset of the decision makers or change the decision makers. Without making a political enemy, the 5-year plan of governments in terms of being re-elected or that has been one of the major stumbling blocks. Yeah. We have adequate plans, we have adequate policies, but we always seem to change them midstream. We always seem to lose sight of the long-term goal. So what do we do?
Either a reversal or revamping.
Correct. So what we need to do, we need to get to the stage where we have educated our decision makers. Our leaders need to be at the point where they embrace what it is we have found as data, hard data, to be able to go from cycle to cycle. It doesn't mean you have to shift every time you change a government or change a minister or change a permanent secretary. There should be a policy, and you find different ways to implement the policy. There's a statement I like to put out there whenever I talk to graduates of the UWI. I tell them, when we the able are unwilling, we may say nothing when those who are less able but more willing do. We should not abdicate our responsibility.
Well, Dr. Gibson, we know that your research has been pretty global. You've been in Norway, and of course you're based in the United States. How does your contribution add to a Caribbean context?
Well, I hope it adds a lot. I'm not an environmental researcher. I study innovation and entrepreneurship.
Right.
And we have projects around the world. My institute is 40 years old. IC Square stands for Innovation, Creativity, and Capital. So how do you use regional assets to build wealth and jobs in those regions? We work in India now, Korea, Portugal, Poland. And I've been coming to the Caribbean for 10 years, working with the University of Belize and Galen University, talking to the ministries. And I've always felt there's such potential, 2 hours from Houston in Belize and also the Caribbean in terms of the natural assets. Well, right now as we speak, there's this conference going on in Morocco that a lot of researchers from the Caribbean are there. It's about the environment. It follows the Paris Agreement. So it seems like the timing is right to look at how can we use research on the environment in terms of the coral reefs, in terms of the marine resources, in terms of all sorts of environmental issues to lead to job creation through science and research. So to me, the Caribbean has the laboratories. Austin, Texas does not have the laboratories. Other universities around the world don't have the laboratories like in the Caribbean. So how do we use those natural laboratories as research and education opportunities, as well as an opportunity to build wealth and jobs around those industries, around those environments?
Now, Belize, and we're speaking a bit about climate change, and I love that you included how a lot of the science and research that takes place and just the basic landscape of this country allows for so much opportunity, but it's untapped. And we hear it all the time. I think part of what, and we spoke about the leadership conference, I think earlier this week, and one of the things we pointed out was looking at how leaderships or how people in decision-making positions go about making decision. I think you heard a bit of the conversation earlier, where there's a power of the people type of momentum that would usually get some type of change to happen. But what that causes is that oftentimes we're so focused on our basic needs or immediate needs that we may not see long-term impact, and we may not see where decisions that seem beneficial now won't necessarily be beneficial for future generations or for even us in our later years. How do you reshape the mentality of leaders to be able to battle with helping people meet immediate needs, but also helping them understand that a long-term investment or focusing on climate change projects in a realistic, evidence-based way should be the way to go?
You're putting too much weight on the leadership, I think, in the policy. It's not always from the top down. In the countries where we've worked, where it's been most effective, it's bottom up and top down. There's entrepreneurship at the universities, it's within the community, the public and private sector, and effective policy, and it's how those things come together. But a lot of places in Asia, actually, they wait for the central government to make policy on terms of how to develop a region, and they don't really understand the region. So it's a cooperation.
Yeah.
And so to me, one of the biggest challenges in Belize and maybe the Caribbean is how to cooperate across the academic, business, and government sectors involving young people to build a future that all can participate and benefit from. And that means over the long term, sustainability.
Yeah.
That includes economic development, and not using economic development to destroy the environment, because that's killing the very asset that you have. So.
Yeah.
Well,
I wanted to, you wanted to?
go
You
ahead.
guys follow up,
Go
yeah.
ahead, Jay.
No, I wanted to add to David that he's so right. A lot of times we focus in one direction when in fact you have to bring it together, because policies were made for people.
That's right.
And if the people haven't bought in, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is what we can improve our livelihoods with, this is what will make us wealthy, you know, and if you don't bring that together, we can talk at the top as long as we want. And so until we realize that, so when we talk about mindsets, it has to be at both ends, right? And I wanted to refer to a project that's going on in urban Belize, where people in a certain community are being taught how to grow their own fruits and vegetables. And so you bring the policymakers and the other stakeholders into that kind of thing to support, but the people have to buy into that. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Exactly.
So both my colleagues are absolutely right. Education is the key. And that's why the university puts itself out there as the entity that's going to allow education. Now that we have the open campus as our engine to get to many of those places that we couldn't get to before, it's a wonderful time to be able to reinvigorate and educate. So education and innovation gives you opportunity. And that's what this conference next 2 days are about. Very important. The new strategic plan of the University of West Indies is built around what we call the AAA. So it's access, where more people have to get access to the University of West Indies. And the open campus, we see that's the engine. That's how we're going to reach people. Everybody used to come to 3 campuses, the 3 landed campuses. That's not the way of the future. The way of the future is to take the campus to the student. So access has to increase. Agility, university must be able to be more agile, more able to respond to what it sees around it, so that we can influence decisions, not talk about it and research it long after. And of course, alignment. And by aligning the university's research to the needs of the countries, you'll be amazed. We've just completed a body of research where we've looked at the development needs based on each country's website in terms of what a country has put out there. Here's what the country says it needs. We've looked within the university and said, how can we align our research with the needs of the country? So we first identified the top 3 for all 17 countries that contribute to the university are economic, social, and environment. So we've turned to our research engines and said, so the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Research, they must go do the economic. We've looked at the Institute for Sustainable Development, they must go look at the environment. We've picked areas that are of critical importance to all countries and started those research engines going. So the response, the alignment is going to be there. The response of the university to the needs of the countries will now be even closer.
Well, Mrs. Bennett, as the woman on the ground here in Belize, we know that the UWI Open Campus has been very instrumental in selecting the panelists for the conference this week. In terms of the wider population who feels that, you know, a leadership conference, why is that important? Why should I know about that? How do you, what would be your message to engage the population?
I think I kind of hinted at it before, Jamie Lee, that we tend to think of leaders at the top, whether it's the top of the church, the top of the the administration, the top of the private sector, but leadership is where you are. And if you have that mindset, then you understand this is something I want to come to for lots of reasons. We mentioned innovation, entrepreneurship. I'd like to see a bunch of entrepreneurs there asking questions, getting engaged. How does this affect me? How can I make my business sustainable? So I want to appeal, and that's a very good question. And I want to get the message out there. This conference is not only for people in leadership positions. We are all leaders. And so if you have heard anything, if you're not sure, call our site at 223-0484 before 9 o'clock so you can get there by 9. And I want to invite people, get what you can out of this. We have experts internationally, regionally. We have panelists who you will recognize, some of them. And they're there to share their expertise, their experiences, and their aspirations with all of us. So it's a conference for everyone. We have students attending, we have teachers, we have private sector, public sector. It's for the everyday man and woman on the street.
Now, Dr. Gibson, as a part of the panel and speaking specifically to innovation, and I think this is something that even idea people struggle in the how-to. And I think we hear so often the push for our next segment is about entrepreneurship. We hear so often about building entrepreneurs, helping young people recognize opportunities in entrepreneurship. But there seems to be a lack of a connection between wanting to and actually being able to. In your presentation today, is that a part of what you want to be able to drive?
By wanting to, do you mean the
going ahead, taking
the young
action?
People,
yeah.
The young people themselves?
Anybody who's interested in being an entrepreneur.
Well, we all just met, and it sounds like we're singing off the same page, but that shows that there's some agreement in what we're talking about. Again, the role of the university is key in everywhere we work. And one of the things that excited me about this conference was the role of the Open University. So how to excite the young people about innovation and entrepreneurship, and I'm arguing in terms of areas of science and research around the environment. But then there's got to be job opportunities, and there's got to be growth, and there's got to be results taken. And you're right, there's got to be metrics for success. Other people get tired pretty quickly. Austin, Texas has a very successful economy. It wasn't driven by Washington, D.C. It wasn't driven by the state capital in Texas. It was driven by the city, the university, and young people in business at the community level. And it's young people that's driving the entrepreneurship. But what makes it work, and why a lot of young people come to Austin, is there's opportunities to do things that produce results. That's the challenge for the Caribbean. We've got to develop that kind of economy. And I think you'll attract talent from around the world. Because again, you have the laboratories in these areas, and it's been said time and time again. But with climate change, with the Open University, with a new sort of way of looking at it, and not only that, there's urgency about this now. Something's got to be done. Crisis is a good way to break down old ways of doing things and starting something new. So I'm excited about this. I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I see possibilities in the Caribbean that not only doing this, but be a model for other regions, other island regions.
Talk about some of the projects that are ongoing, that your institute is involved with in other parts of the world.
For example, I helped start the Portugal program, which was working with everywhere we go, we see young, smart people. And the challenge in Portugal is they had excellent universities, they were small, they had some excellent faculty, but to work together so they had critical masses of excellence was a crucial thing, and it's difficult to do. Talking to Professor Weber, people get buried in their research and it's hard to break that out, but he's working at it. The other thing was, it's a country of 10 million people. They needed to get external markets for that to really work. Same with the Caribbean. So we help them develop external markets either to Europe or to the United States because we have those networks. We're working in Korea, we're working in India, a lot of solar energy issues. So what we hope to do with my institute and university is bring some of that international talent and link it to the Caribbean and energize what's happening here. And the other thing is, always happens, is learning goes both ways.
Yeah.
Every time I come to Belize, I learn things. I learn things about this environment, I learn challenges, I learn how to think differently about things. So the learning process is always two ways, and was mentioned earlier. Not just the top down, but the bottom up. There's a lot of learning that goes on there. So re-education, both sides. Everybody has some good arguments about why we don't do things or why we do things, but you got to get together. And I'll stop here. But the biggest challenge is getting regions to work together. Everywhere we go, they can have great science, they can have great talent, but unless they work together, nothing will happen.
Well, we greatly appreciate the passion. Don't worry about that. I think it is important. And Ms. Jane, let's just bring this back to one of our critical points that we spoke about when we last discussed the conference, and that is how important is the communication aspect of it. Are we sending out, you have wonderful research. I'm sure if I attempted to read it, I'd be lost by the first page. And it's the same when you perhaps bring case studies from other countries. The cultural context won't connect with me. You say 10 million and you need an external market, and I say, Belize is so far away from 10 million, what will we do? So how do you communicate to be able to inspire action and the connectivity that you're talking about?
Well, and I'll stop because I want to hear the other panelists, because I think what they're saying is right on target too, but it's the learning process. If we bring people from Austin or from Portugal or India, they've got to get embedded in the regional environment, because you're right, unless it makes a connection, it's not going to work. You can't tell people what to do. It can't be from the outside on top, because the experts in Belize and the Caribbean are the people that live in Belize and the Caribbean. But the challenge is giving them the catalyst and the mentorship or the help to take it to the next level.
And as you think about what it is we can offer, what do we have? So we need to look around the Caribbean. We need to look at sustainable agriculture, sustainable tourism. We need to look at alternative livelihoods. We need to look at how we can get ahead of the curve. So you're fishermen. That's a major part of what happens in Belize and Antigua and Barbados. What's going to happen as the fish populations move? What's going to happen as we lose reefs? Are we going to do reef restorations? Are we going to do mangrove restorations? What are we going to do? Now, each of those offer an opportunity for young entrepreneurs to get into the business, either to do or to create the service so that others can do. Our job is to open those windows and provide enough evidence through the research that this is a sure winner, so that people feel confident and competent to get involved.
I know that one of the issues in today's society is that a lot of people are still gravitating towards the traditional, careers like accounting, law. How does the university plan to light a fire under persons to believe in sustainable employment?
I personally, from my perspective, I think we're getting there, but it's really difficult. And I think we talked about this I don't remember if it was with Marlene or somebody else this week, that we need to start very early with our population. If everybody and their mother wants to be a lawyer, someone to be a doctor, someone, the traditional things. But if you start instilling in our children at a very early age that there's a whole wide world out there, there are lots of things that you can do, talents you already have, interests they may already be developing, that's the place to start. But I wanted to go back to something that Marlene talked about. And even sometimes, when we get documentation and assignments from our headquarters in Barbados or around the region, I tell my staff, this sounds wonderful, now let's Belizeanize it. And I think that's the whole concept of what we're talking about. So people like David come into our country, they do wonderful work, but two things that has to happen is, first of all, the language, as you rightfully said. Don't talk to people in language they don't understand, or they won't be able to be engaged and respond, right? And then tell them what's the with them. You remember me saying that before. What's in it for me and my family and my country, and then I'll get on board. But don't be talking up there, bring it down to me so I can see what is in it for me. And I think that's a good place to start. And I wanted to refer to something Dale just said. I remember seeing on TV recently farmers in the South being taught how to farm seaweed. And I thought that was fascinating. I just thought that was fascinating. So talk about innovation and going outside. Well, Dr. Longsworth said yesterday, there's no box. So don't think outside the box, just think, so.
Can I add another spin to that? So you talk about the traditional professions and people getting in there. I think those traditional professions are fine. You know what we need to do? What I think Jane is saying, turn it another way with the communication is everybody needs to take sustainability on board. The lawyers, the doctors, and everybody else. They need to be, it needs to be second nature. If you think of sustainability as using today's resources, whatever those resources are, with the thought that the next 7 generations should be able to benefit by what you've done. Intergenerational equity is the term that we use. But take that out of its fancy terminology, it means my grandchildren's children should know that there was a resource here and there continues to be a resource here. Now, we think of resources and we think of the earth, we think of the sea, but think of the opportunities as resources, think of the humans as resources.
Yeah.
We need to have everybody thinking sustainability from the very outset. So as you do your medicine, as you do your law, as you do your accounting, sustainability is a part of you from the very beginning.
All right. And I love that Dr. Gibson fits right in expanding the horizons that people perhaps, or I should say, since there is no box, just to think of things as how you'd like them to do and go after them, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we can give lots of lessons learned from other regions, and you're right. Portugal's different than the Caribbean and from India, but there's lessons that have been learned. And as I mentioned to Professor Weber before, I've been to lots of regions where they think building a structure or a science park is going to turn things around and nothing happens. It's the capacity of the people. And as was mentioned, thinking entrepreneurially in all professions. You know, how do we make change? And you say, you know, you want to see things different. As soon as we start having some successful entrepreneurs come out of the Caribbean in terms of business or in terms of science, pretty soon they become role models for others. And that's what happened in Austin. Dell Computers was started in Austin. He started in his dorm room, you know. And again, he couldn't do it alone. A lot of people, this was back in the 1982, a lot of people around him were his mentors and helpers, people from Silicon Valley. So it always takes mentors and people from the other places. Nobody does it alone.
Let me ask you one particular question to that. I know in conversations with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial agencies in this country, we speak very often of the lack of local support. In a small country where the population is already too small to serve, and there's a lot of resources you can use, how is this, one, common in most countries that you work in, and 2, what are some of the steps in terms of being able to overcome them and not allow it to be a mental block from the start?
You're good. You raise lots of challenges, and that's a challenge. Especially if you're starting it out, there's not a lot of mentors that have experience in those areas. That's where collaborations come in to help. And also, in the digital economy, things are different now. A lot of this can be done, or some of it can be done online. The Open University is having a massive impact now that it couldn't before the Open University, right? So the same thing can happen with entrepreneurship and innovation. But again, you need catalysts for change and workshops, and maybe there'll be one lawyer or one policymaker that'll think more entrepreneurially about what they can do to help this business grow, or a bank, and all of a sudden that becomes a role model for others.
One of the things that I thought about, Marlene, that we really need to buy into is we cannot develop any country if you don't develop your people. And that doesn't mean we all have to go into a classroom, right? You learn where you are, you validate what you're learning, and other people have to validate it too. And I think once we start shifting that kind of thinking, I mean, you can be sitting anywhere and you're learning. We learn every day. Put
and
that
your
into
laboratories. Your laboratories, as Dave says, are fantastic. You have the 2nd largest barrier reef in the world. Can you imagine what's living on those reefs? All we can do, the next cure for cancer, the next cure for, it's on that reefs out there. Pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals.
And how important it is to keep that alive.
Conservation and research, those are opportunities that are untapped.
Well, we would love to extend this conversation, but that's
So
why
come to
you're
the conference.
That's why you're having a conference.
That's right.
And that's why people need to come there to continue it.
So people can ask more questions and be able to see even different perspectives, as you have many other panelists lined up as well. We want to thank you for being here. It was a great conversation, lots of food for thought, and people can register still by contacting you.
Or just showing up at 9 o'clock. We have registration going on. Marlene, please, just one little thing before I go. Right. Reminding the public that we have the Belmopan Panyard takes place on Saturday at 6 o'clock at the Hilltop Basketball Court.
All right, and with that, We got to wrap up this segment. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about Global Entrepreneurship Week. So stay tuned.